Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Today's video is going to be all about pigments, the right way to use them, the right brushes to use, and I'm pretty sure that most of you have been using them wrong, just like I was. Please keep watching and I'll show you what I learned.
Come and take your place, 'cause the love you give, you can't be replaced. So no one else knows what to do. That's why I spend my life with you. I won't please you anywhere.
So jumping right in, the first thing I want to talk about are the powders. There are two primary types of powders. One is going to be mica powders. Mica powders are shimmery and have a pearlescent finish, and they feel kind of soft. They're primarily used in makeups and body care. The second type of powder that we're going to be discussing today is pigment powder. Pigment powders have a matte finish and feel very heavy and dense. They provide great coverage. So the neon pigment powders are most popular and you can find them anywhere. But I wanted to show you guys some of the colors that I created using the neon powders to create other colors. I created a YouTube short that I'll put up in the cards with a better explanation of how I did it. One of the first and most important things when using pigment powder is going to be your base. You can pretty much use any light color, but for me, white always gives the most vibrant and saturated color payoff. I'm going to go ahead and polish these swatch sticks with 2 thin coats of this pure white gel polish, and I'm going to cure each coat for 60 seconds. It took me a while to find the perfect gel polish for my pigment powders. Some whites didn't leave enough of a tacky layer, and then there were some that were too tacky and my powders did not adhere properly, and it almost made my pigments look wet. IGel Beauty's Pure White is the perfect white base for my pigment powders. I typically do 2 thin coats and cure each coat for 60 seconds, and that gives me the perfect amount of tack for my pigment powders. I'm going to go ahead and flip my mat over just to protect the top so that I don't get pigment powders all over it. Here are my swatch sticks and they have all been cured for 60 seconds. So let's discuss brushes. I was always taught in the beginning, you want to get a big fluffy brush. You need a big fluffy brush. Let me tell you, you do not want to get a big fluffy brush. One of the most important keys when choosing your brush for your pigment powder is going to be your brush density. It doesn't matter how long the bristles are, but you want them to be compacted together so that you can control how much pigment that you're picking up. I just dipped the brush into the pigment and you can see how much pigment powder is clumped on the end of the brush. One of the biggest mistakes that I made when I started using pigment powders was using way too much pigment on a big fluffy brush. It took some time, but I finally figured out that working with smaller, more dense brushes work better for pigment powders. It's easier to control and build up the coverage with a smaller brush. Also, I stopped dipping my brush into the pigment jar and started working out of the lid. Believe it or not, the pigment powder stuck to the lid is way more pigment powder than you'll ever need to do a design or to do a set of nails. That's one of the beauties of pigment powders. Again, a little goes a very long way. Once I figured that out, it helped me a lot. As you see, I will tap my brush into the pigment powder on the paper towel. I am not dipping it back into that jar. Once I'm happy with the coverage, I'll go ahead and dust off the excess powder. I'm always sure to file the edges because a lot of times pigment powders and chrome powders can chip if the edges are not filed clean. Once I'm happy with the edges and the coverage, I'm going to go in with base coat. Now, base coat is not a requirement. You don't have to do it, but I like to do it just to provide a little bit of insurance to give the pigment powder something to stick to. Pigment powders and chrome powders are very smooth and slick, as are no wipe top coats. So I find that putting on a very thin layer of base coat gives the top coat and the pigment powder something to stick to. It's also really important when using pigment powders to thoroughly clean your brushes between each color. I'm going to go ahead and let that base coat cure for 60 seconds and go ahead and clean my brushes. Another quick tip is you want to always dry clean your brushes. Don't spray them with alcohol or acetone, because that won't dry fast enough and you will wet your pigment powder, and that's not what you want to do. So now that that base coat has been fully cured, I'm going in with a thin layer of no wipe top coat, and I'm going to go ahead and cure that for 60 seconds. Here are two other small brushes that I really like. This one is the Wet n Wild Smoky eyeshadow brush, and this one is the small concealer brush. Both have very dense and short bristles, perfect for pigment powders. If you don't have access to the brushes, eyeshadow applicators work as well. I just prefer to use the brushes. So here is our top coat. It's fully cured, and yeah, great coverage. It looks just like gel polish. Moving on, I'm going to show you how I ombre with pigments. As I stated before, the powder in the lid is plenty. You don't need to dip your brush into the jar. That's how you end up with way too much pigment. As you can see, the orange is just a tiny little bit, and with that tiny little bit, I'm able to pretty much cover half of this nail. Because I want my ombre to blend in the middle, I'm going to start at what would be the cuticle area of the nail and bring it down. I am getting lighter toward the middle, and I want to be more saturated toward the cuticle area. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush and move to my pink pigment. With the pink pigment, instead of starting where the orange ends, I'm going to start at the tip where the white is and blend up into the orange. If I were to start where the orange stops, I would have the opposite effect of what I'm looking for. And because I want that blend in the middle, if I start at the pointed area, the free edge area, and blend upward, it'll get lighter toward the middle. The same effect that the orange had, working from the cuticle area down. As you can see, I am using that little tiny bit of pink pigment on the paper towel to touch up where I need to touch up and blend where I need to blend. Now that my nail is fully covered, I'm going in with a very thin layer of base coat, and I'm going to go ahead and cure that for 60 seconds. So I was able to cover this entire nail with just the pigment powder stuck to the top of the lid and that tiny little bit of powder that I had tapped out onto my paper towel. I never had to dip my brush back into the jar. Pigments are so dense and heavy that honestly a little bit really does go a long way. Now that my base coat is fully cured, I am going in with a thin layer of no wipe top coat and curing that for 60 seconds. When I first got started with pigments, I was definitely using way too much powder, and my brushes were way too big and fluffy. So here are both of our nails fully cured, and they look really good. Now I'm going to show you how to do rainbow or stacked colors. I'm going to go ahead and pull out all 6 colors because I'm going to be using all of these for the next nail. When I'm doing rainbow nails or stacking my colors, the most important thing to me is paying attention to where and when I'm using the yellow pigment powder. The reason that's so important is because the yellow is the lightest color, and any flecks of color that get into it will show up so easily. So I try to be very mindful of where and when I'm using the yellow. I'm gonna go ahead and open all of these up, and if there isn't a lot of pigment in the lid, I am going to just shake a little bit into the lid, not much, just a tiny little bit, because that's all I'm going to need. So I'm going in with the small concealer brush, and I am going to go ahead and start with yellow and work my way down. So as you can see, I'm dipping into the lid and tapping on that yellow. I didn't wipe it off before I started, and that was way too much. So I went ahead and wiped a little bit off. And now I'm gonna move over to the green. I'm putting that green right up against that yellow and then bringing it down just a little bit. I'm using the very edge of my brush to blend those colors, but with pigment powders being so dense and heavy, they don't typically want to blend as well. So I'm going to move over to my blue and repeat the process. A little tip I want to tell you is when using multiple colors, stacking your colors, or even if you're just using one or two colors, you want to blow away any excess pigment powder. Do not reach for your dust brush and try to brush it away. You always want to gently blow it away. I've learned over time that when I use my dust brush to try to remove any excess color, it ends up streaking, or I will brush it into a color that I don't mean to. It's just best to literally lightly blow those excess particles away to give yourself a more clean and crisp finish. And it helps you not contaminate those colors, and it helps to keep your colors nice and separate. Now that I have my nail fully covered, I am going in and just touching up where I need to with a little bit of pigment powder from the lid. Now that our nail is fully covered, I'm going to grab my dust brush, and instead of brushing upward toward the yellow, I'm going to brush downward away from the yellow. That way, the yellow pigment particles will not contaminate those darker colors, but if there were any loose particles and I brushed up toward the yellow, I could very easily contaminate that yellow and you'd see specks of those other colors, and it just doesn't look very good. So I'm gonna go in with a very thin layer of base coat and cure this for 60 seconds. Here is our nail, and the base coat has been fully cured. I'm now going in with a thin layer of no wipe top coat and curing that for 60 seconds. While that nail is curing, I'm going to show you how I do my vertical ombre using two colors. I'm gonna use this purple and blue. And I don't have a whole lot of pigment in the lid, so I am just going to go into the jar, but tap it on the paper towel to remove the excess. So you'll notice that I am blowing off that excess powder. I am not using my dust brush to remove it. I'm just simply lightly and gently blowing it away. So I have covered one side with the blue, and now I'm going in with purple on the other side and blending in the middle. Now there was some sort of particles or lint in either my pigment or my white polish. I'm not sure. And I'll show you the particle and what I did to fix it. So I'll come a little bit closer so you can see those tiny little specks. It looks like lint bunched up on the edge. What I'm gonna do is completely wipe this off and just start over. Because we haven't sealed in our pigment powder with base coat, we can literally just wipe it off and start over. So I'm gonna clean this off really well with some rubbing alcohol, and I am going to go in with one very, very thin layer of white gel polish, our IGel Beauty Pure White. And I'm gonna cure that for 60 seconds and just start over. So any dust or lint that was stuck on the nail or in the pigment has been wiped away, and we have a completely smooth surface to work with now. I didn't notice it before, if it was in the paint or the pigment, but either way it goes, we have wiped it away, and I'm gonna go ahead and cure for 60 seconds. So our gel polish has been cured, and we're just going to start over. I'm going to start with blue going down one side of the nail, and I am just gently rubbing it into the tacky layer. Sorry, I'm a little bit out of frame. I was trying to make sure that there weren't any more lint particles. But once I covered that one half, I'm going to now go in with purple from the lid and just cover the other side of the nail. Anywhere that purple touches, it's going to stick to, even a little bit on top of the blue. What I love about pigments is the fact that you can build up your coverage. That blue was the same blue that I used in that rainbow ombre nail, and you'll see the difference with the coverage based on how heavy or how light I used the pigment. I'm going to go ahead and file the edges and dust off any excess powders because the nail is fully covered. We can use our dust brush now. And I'm going to put down a thin layer of base coat and cure this for 60 seconds. While that nail is curing, I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush just to get as much of the pigment powder out as I possibly can so that I don't contaminate my other colors. Now that our base coat is fully cured, I'm going to go in with a thin layer of no wipe top coat and cure that for 60 seconds. While this top coat is curing for 60 seconds, I want to show you what happens when you over cure your base color. So sometimes when you over cure a color, it will lose the amount of tackiness that it has. So I cured this white gel polish for 180 seconds, which would be 3 rounds of 60 seconds instead of just 1 round of 60 seconds. So as you can see, the pigment is not sticking to this nail at all. No matter how I press it in or rub it in, it doesn't stick at all. So I'm going to go ahead and get my rubbing alcohol and just clean that pigment powder off. And I am going to do a thin layer of white gel polish and just cure this for our normal amount of time, our perfect amount of time, 60 seconds. So here's our ombre nail and it is fully cured. So now that we have pulled that white out of the lamp after 60 seconds, now you can see that it is going on perfectly. There's enough tack there to grip the pigment, and it is holding on really, really well. So the amount of time that you cure your base color is super, super important to get the type of coverage and saturation that you need. So now that we have our nail fully covered, I'm going to go ahead and clean up the edges, and I want to show you something that I learned by mistake. Matte top coat and pigments do not play well together at all. Whatever is in matte top coat will pull the color from your pigments. Pigment powders and matte top coat do not play well together at all. Whatever they put in the top coat to make the gel polish have that matte effect, it will pull the color from your pigment, as you can see on this paper towel. I was doing a rainbow nail one day and I went in with my matte top coat and it literally ruined the entire nail because it pulled all the colors together. So now that I've cured that, I am trying to fix this by just going over the matte top coat with my pigment powder. You can't really tell on camera, but it's super splotchy and it just does not look good and smooth at all. So what I would do is go in with my base coat and then my no wipe top coat, and then finish that with my matte top coat after I do my no wipe glossy top coat. That way your pigment is protected and you can have a perfect matte finish. Now I'm going to show you how I do pigments over black to get a super vibrant color payoff. You want to do 2 very thin layers of black gel polish and cure each layer for 60 seconds. If black gel polish is too thick, it will wrinkle while curing, so your layers being thin is very important. Now that our black gel polish has been fully cured, I'm going in with 1 thin layer of no wipe top coat. However, I am curing this for 2 rounds of 60 seconds to be sure it is fully cured. I have a little bit of pure white gel polish on my palette, and this is going to be the base for our pigment design. Our no wipe top coat is fully cured. I am using my finger just to tap on this white gel polish so I don't have to dirty another brush. And then I am going to go ahead and cure this for 60 seconds. Now that our white is fully cured, I'm going to use the small contour brush to begin pressing in my pigments. Now, because we did fully cure that glossy top coat, the pigment powder is only going to stick to the white gel polish. There have been times where I didn't fully cure the glossy top coat and some of the pigment powder stuck to it. So you want to be really mindful that you are fully curing that no wipe top coat to ensure that your pigment powders only stick to your white gel polish. I am gently blowing as I am pressing in the pigments. I have not picked up my dust brush just yet because I want to make sure that I have blown away any of the excess pigment particles that may be on the nail. I don't want to blend them into each other. I'm also dusting around the yellow, trying not to push anything into it. Once I'm comfortable with that, I am going to go ahead with my no wipe top coat and cure that for 60 seconds. I am not using a base coat because this design does not go all the way to the edges of the nail. So there's no need to protect that entire design with base coat because it's pretty much in the middle of the nail. So here are our final nails. Everything is cured. Here's that blue I was talking about. This is the same blue. One is much darker and one is much lighter because I was in control of the pressure and the amount of pigment that I used. So just taking your time and thinking about your design and what kind of coverage you want will help you dictate the type of brush that you need to use. Again, just a reminder, a little goes a long way. Start with a very small amount of pigment and then build up from there. You'd be surprised at how much coverage you get from a tiny little bit of powder. This was our matte nail that was kind of jacked up. One thing that I wanted to point out is that when you top coat your nail or base coat your nail, be sure to cover the entire nail, because when you go to clean up your client's hand or go to wipe off the nail, you can remove some of that pigment if you didn't fully protect it with your base coat or your top coat. Do you see that white peeking out right there? That's because I did not cover that particular area with my base coat. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.